We have that leaked United Nations report that says that the Sudanese Armed Forces attack and invasion of IBA was, in the words of the UN, tantamount to ethnic cleansing. So I was going to ask you, what's the administration's response to that report, and what consequences are being considered? And then the other aspect of this is the new report, the June 1st attack by the LRA. You have, well, it's been 25 years now that we've dealt with Kony, Joseph Kony, and he's been abducting children and brutalizing them in such a horrific way that he turns them into killing machines. But the last report is escaped child soldiers have reported Sudan Armed Forces trucks during their time in activity, delivering munitions, delivering weaponry, also bringing uniforms to LRA commanders. This is pretty problematic, especially when you consider that the latest attack on June the 1st had them repeat the modus operandi that Kony also often uses, where he gathered a lot of children, had some of the people massacred in front of their very eyes, and then had some of them identify and kill their parents, and then had them boil them and dismember them and boil them in water. The fact that we have not been able to get across to the Khartoum government that this kind of support, this kind of using the LRA to destabilize South Sudan, and this was on the South Sudan-Ugandan border where this occurred. The fact that we haven't been able to drive that home means that just explaining this to them may not be working. So what is the administration prepared to do in light of this in order to get some results here? And maybe also, by the way, I mean, we've given the authorization, myself and Congressman McGovern, on that legislation. You've got the green light on taking Kony out. What is being done to take Kony out?
Thank you, Congressman. I couldn't agree more about the horrific character of the LRA. There was a meeting just in Addis while I was there of a meeting of the countries of the region and the United States and others on how to implement exactly what you're talking about to eliminate the LRA. We have a task force in Washington following up on the legislation. The very good legislation has come out of the Congress. Actually, a member of my staff is taking over the lead of that in July. So I think the plans are being formulated by a coalition of countries in that area along those borders to go after the remnants of the LRA. We've made it very clear to Khartoum that any support of the LRA is a threat to any kind of normal relations. I hadn't seen the report that you mentioned. I would like to get it, please, because I do raise this issue often. But we do have, and I would ask my colleagues in the department who work on this to give you an up-to-date on what happened in Addis and the plans that are getting underway.
Very good. And I'm going to follow up with another point, and that is the new mission that the UN is working on regionally there. And my concern is what is being done to give them the wherewithal to protect civilians, to make certain that they have, as part of that mandate, a definition that gives them the ability to adequately, in situations where what we've already seen happening in Darfur happens again, make sure that there's a credible deterrence there.
The problem for UN peacekeeping forces is, of course, how much they get out in front and start engaging in conflict with one party or another. It's a long-standing issue.
Well, get out in front is your way of looking at it. Listen, I was in Darfur. I've seen. It's not a matter of getting out in front. It's a question of when civilians are overrun and slaughtered and run to the UN, or to take the situation, for example, in the former Yugoslavia.
Right. No, I take your point. I take your point completely, because it is important that the UN be proactive in those situations. And it goes to the question I was asked earlier about the South. We want a capability in the new UN mission there to move very quickly in situations like that. In fact, to have a good sense of where that kind of problem might break out. In UNAMID, in Darfur, we have gotten the UN force to be much more proactive in asserting its rights to move into areas and get to them. And those cases that you described where they haven't been doing so have been the source of not only great consternation on our part, but very frank discussions with the UN. So I take your point.
And one last point, if I could get this in. The Chad-Cameroon pipeline project, I went out there and took a look at that, and we put a lot of pressure on that government to try to make sure that that money went not to line politicians' pockets, right, but for roads and for schools. The question here is going to be, in South Sudan, what you will be able to do, as difficult a challenge as this is going to prove to be, to make sure that our government is supporting the ability to put in place the transparency necessary, because otherwise this is going to have a sad ending. Whereas if we get out in front of this and really leverage what influence we have for full transparency in terms of the oil revenue, I think it could have a very beneficial outcome in building society there and maybe teaching a lesson to the North as well. So I just ask you on that front.
No, Congressman, and I mentioned this earlier, I don't think I've had a conversation with officials in the South that this issue has not been raised. But more specifically, we and the Norwegians are putting 10 people into the Ministry of Petroleum to help them develop the right systems. We are working with the Ministry of Finance to get transparency there. Our friends from Britain and Norway have joined us to say this is going to be a critical factor in how the world comes to support the government of South Sudan. So it is a big issue, and we have emphasized it a great deal.
Ambassador